An angry officer mistook him for a criminal and publicly arrested him at the airport. But he didn't know that in front of him was an FBI agent on a mission. How did the events unfold further, and who ended up trapped? Subscribe to our channel and write in the comments where you are watching this from. Leon Williams stood amidst the hustle and bustle of the international airport, blending in with the sea of passengers moving with purpose through the terminal. His casual attire and calm demeanor were intentional. He needed to look like just another traveler, inconspicuous among the crowd. But beneath the surface, Leon was anything but ordinary. He was a seasoned Interpol agent with months of preparation and undercover work leading to this very moment. The mission today was critical: intercept a key figure in a terrorist group and dismantle an international network of arms trafficking. As he stood near a row of departure gates, scanning the crowd, Leon's mind was razor sharp, every sense heightened. He was waiting for his informant, a man who had risked everything to pass on vital information about the upcoming deal. Leon had worked tirelessly to gain the trust of this terrorist cell, embedding himself deep enough to gather actionable intelligence. Now, all of that effort culminated in this one meeting at the airport. If he succeeded, it would mean the collapse of one of the most dangerous criminal networks operating across multiple borders. Failure, however, was not an option. The terminal was alive with sound. The announcements over the loudspeakers, the clattering of suitcase wheels, and the murmur of hundreds of conversations happening all at once. Leon maintained his relaxed posture, but his eyes constantly moved, picking up every detail: the businessman on his phone, the family struggling with their luggage, the teenager engrossed in a handheld game. He noticed everything. And that's why, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a man staring at him with unease. It was a split-second glance, but Leon knew that look. The man, a middle-aged, nervous type, whispered something to the airline employee beside him, gesturing subtly in Leon's direction. Leon's gut twisted. This was bad. He shifted his stance slightly, trying to appear nonchalant, but his instincts told him that trouble was brewing. He had seen it too many times before. The nervous glances, the suspicious stares. It wasn't new to him. His presence as a black man in a place like this was often enough for someone to assume the worst. Within minutes, his fears were confirmed. Striding purposefully toward him was an airport security officer, white, tall, broad-shouldered, with a stern look on his face. His badge read Officer Michael Harris. Leon recognized the type immediately. He'd encountered men like Harris throughout his career, men who made snap judgments based on the color of his skin, who wielded their authority like a weapon. As Harris approached, Leon forced himself to remain calm, his heartbeat quickening only slightly. He couldn't afford to draw attention. "Sir, I need you to step aside," Harris barked, his voice carrying an edge of authority that invited no argument. Passengers nearby turned to look, curiosity piqued. Leon gave a polite nod, trying to defuse the situation before it escalated. "Of course, officer," Leon said evenly, raising his hands slightly to show compliance. "Is there a problem?" Harris eyed him with suspicion, his gaze lingering on Leon's face before sweeping down to his casual attire. "We got a report about a suspicious individual matching your description," he said, his tone dripping with distrust. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Leon suppressed a sigh. This was exactly the kind of situation he didn't need. Not now, not today, when so much was at stake. He reached slowly into his jacket, pulling out his Interpol badge and handing it to Harris. The officer barely glanced at it before his lip curled in disdain. He tossed the badge onto the ground, his eyes narrowing. "Interpol, huh? You expect me to believe that?" Harris scoffed, his hand resting on the holster of his sidearm. The disdain in his voice was unmistakable. Around them, the crowd of onlookers grew, people stopping to watch the confrontation unfold. Phones were being pulled out, cameras pointed at them. Leon's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay composed. "That's exactly who I am," Leon said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm in the middle of an important operation. If you just check with your superiors, you'll see—" "I'm not checking with anyone," Harris snapped, cutting him off. He took a step closer, his posture aggressive, his voice lowering to a growl. "You're coming with me. Now, get on the ground." Leon's heart sank. He could see the crowd pressing in, whispering, filming. He could feel the eyes on him, judging, assuming. He knew that if he resisted, even verbally, things could escalate quickly, and he might not get out of this unscathed or alive. But every second he spent here, his mission was unraveling. He needed to meet his informant. The terrorists could be alerted any moment now. "Officer, please," Leon said, still trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. "This is a misunderstanding that could jeopardize an ongoing international operation. You need to listen to me." "I said, get on the ground," Harris shouted, drawing his weapon, the muzzle pointed directly at Leon's chest. Gasps erupted from the gathered crowd. Leon had no choice. Slowly, he lowered himself to his knees, his hands raised in the air. His pulse thundered in his ears, a mix of fear, anger, and frustration coursing through him. As he knelt on the cold airport floor, Leon's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. Not now. Not when he was so close. He looked around, desperately hoping for someone, anyone, who might be able to help. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them. The terrorists watching him from across the terminal. They had seen everything. Their eyes met his for a brief moment, and Leon could see the recognition dawning on their faces. They knew who he was. They knew they had been compromised. "Damn it," Leon muttered under his breath as Harris moved behind him, roughly grabbing his arms and forcing them behind his back. The cold bite of metal cut into his wrists as the handcuffs clicked into place. He had to do something, anything, to salvage this situation before it was too late. "You have no idea what you're doing," Leon said, his voice low, as Harris pulled him to his feet. "You're making a huge mistake." Harris ignored him, his grip tightening as he began to march Leon away, through the terminal. The crowd parted before them, some people still filming, others whispering to one another. Leon's face burned with humiliation, but more than that, he felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. The terrorists were slipping away, and with them months of work, months of risking his life to bring them down. As they moved through the terminal, Leon tried one last time. "Call your supervisor," he said, his voice urgent. "Check my credentials. I'm telling you the truth." "Shut up," Harris snapped, giving him a rough shove. "I don't need to hear any more of your lies." Leon stumbled but managed to keep his balance, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. He could see the exit ahead, the doors that led to the police vehicles outside. He was running out of time, and with every step they took, his chances of saving the mission slipped further and further away. Just as they reached the doors, a voice called out, "Officer Harris, stand down." Harris paused, turning, and Leon looked up to see a tall man in a dark uniform striding toward them, his face set in a grim expression. The man was the head of airport security. Leon recognized him immediately. Relief flooded through him, though he kept his expression neutral. "What's going on here?" the head of security demanded, his eyes flicking from Harris to Leon and back again. "We got a report of a suspicious individual," Harris began, but the head of security cut him off. "Do you know who this is?" he snapped, pointing at Leon. "This man is an Interpol agent, and you're about to jeopardize a major international operation. Release him. Now." Harris blinked, taken aback. "But," he started, but the head of security's glare silenced him. "I said now," he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. With obvious reluctance, Harris pulled out his keys and unlocked the handcuffs, the metal clinking as they fell away from Leon's wrists. Leon stood, rubbing his sore wrists, his eyes locking on Harris's. He could see the anger, the frustration, but also a flicker of something else. Humiliation. The head of security turned to Leon, his expression softening slightly. "Agent Williams, I'm terribly sorry for this misunderstanding. You're free to continue your mission." Leon nodded, his voice tight. "Thank you." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his mind already shifting gears. He had lost valuable time, but the mission wasn't over yet. He could still salvage this. He had to. The terrorists were out there, and he wasn't going to let them get away. As he moved through the terminal, Leon's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of his targets. The adrenaline still pumped through his veins, his focus sharper than ever. He had been humiliated, his cover almost blown, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. Not now. Not ever. The mission was still alive, barely, and Leon was determined to see it through to the end, no matter what it took. Leon moved quickly, weaving through the throngs of passengers as he tried to regain control of the situation. He had barely escaped disaster, and now every second counted. He had seen the terrorists just before his arrest, and he knew they had seen him too. They wouldn't wait around. They would be on the move, making adjustments to their plan. The operation was in jeopardy, and Leon had to act fast. His mind raced as he replayed the scene in his head. Harris's aggressive behavior, the humiliating way he'd been forced to the ground, the clicking of the handcuffs as they snapped onto his wrists. It had all happened so fast, but it left a bitter taste in his mouth. He couldn't afford to let that distract him, though. He had a job to do. He had to focus on finding the targets and finishing what he'd started. He pushed through the crowds, his eyes scanning for familiar faces, his heart pounding in his chest. The terrorists were somewhere in the airport, and he knew they would be moving fast. The public spectacle of his arrest had undoubtedly spooked them. Leon had spent months getting close to them, gaining their trust, only to have all of that work nearly undone by one officer's prejudice. But he wasn't going to let that ruin everything. He had faced setbacks before, and he had always come out on top. As Leon scanned the terminal, he spotted a group of men moving quickly toward the exit. 3 of them, all dressed in dark clothing, each one of them with the unmistakable air of people who didn't want to be noticed. Leon's instincts told him these were the men he was after. He quickened his pace, his eyes locked onto their retreating forms. They were heading toward an exit that led to the airport's parking garage, a perfect place to vanish without a trace. Leon had to stop them before they got that far. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a voice answered, curt and professional. "Monroe here?" "Jack, it's Leon. I'm still in the terminal, but the targets are on the move," Leon said, his voice low and urgent as he maneuvered through the crowd. "They're heading toward the west exit, near the parking structure. I need backup, now." There was a pause, and Leon could hear the sound of a vehicle engine in the background. "Got it. We're on our way," Jack Monroe replied. "Hang tight, Leon. Don't lose them." Leon hung up, his eyes never leaving the men as they neared the exit. He couldn't afford to lose sight of them. He was painfully aware that he was operating on borrowed time. The terrorists knew he was there, and they would be looking for any opportunity to disappear. He had to be careful, but he also had to be bold. There was no room for error. Just as the men reached the doors leading to the parking garage, Leon broke into a run. He dodged past startled passengers, ignoring the gasps and confused stares. He couldn't let them get away. He burst through the doors, the cool evening air hitting him like a slap. The parking structure loomed ahead, dimly lit and filled with rows of vehicles that provided plenty of cover for anyone who wanted to hide. Leon spotted the men again, moving quickly between the cars, their heads down as they tried to remain inconspicuous. He knew he couldn't wait for backup to arrive. He had to act now. He moved silently, using the cars for cover as he closed the distance between them. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had been in countless dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher. He had already been compromised once today, and he couldn't afford another mistake. As he crept closer, Leon could hear snippets of conversation between the men. They were speaking in hushed tones, their voices tense. They were clearly agitated, and Leon could tell they were discussing their next move. He heard the word airport and switch, and he knew they were planning to change their transportation and get out of there as quickly as possible. He couldn't let that happen. Leon ducked behind a car just a few feet away from the men, his breathing steady despite the tension in the air. He watched as one of them pulled out a phone and made a call, speaking quickly in a language Leon couldn't understand. He didn't need to understand the words to know that they were making arrangements to flee. He had to stop them now. Slowly, Leon reached into his jacket and pulled out his gun, keeping it low and out of sight. He knew he had to approach this carefully. He needed to detain them without causing a panic in the parking garage. He took a deep breath, his eyes locked on the men. He was about to step out from behind the car when suddenly there was a shout. "Hey, stop right there," a familiar voice called out, echoing through the parking garage. Leon's heart sank. He turned to see Officer Harris standing at the entrance, his gun drawn, his face twisted in anger. He had followed Leon, and now his reckless interference was about to blow the entire operation. The terrorists turned at the sound of Harris's voice, their eyes widening in alarm. Without hesitation, they bolted, splitting up and disappearing between the rows of cars. Leon cursed under his breath, stepping out from his hiding place and aiming his gun at the nearest man. But before he could take the shot, Harris was there, grabbing Leon by the arm and shoving him back. "I said stop!" Harris shouted again, his eyes wild as he looked at Leon. "You're under arrest." "Damn it, Harris!" Leon snapped, yanking his arm free. "You're ruining everything. These men are terrorists." But Harris wasn't listening. He was too caught up in his own anger, too blinded by his assumptions about Leon. He lunged at Leon again, trying to wrestle him to the ground. Leon had no choice but to defend himself, shoving Harris away with enough force to send him stumbling back. He couldn't let this idiot ruin everything. "I don't have time for this," Leon growled, turning his attention back to the terrorists. But it was too late. They had vanished into the maze of cars, and Leon knew that finding them now would be nearly impossible. He could hear the wail of sirens in the distance, Jack and his team were on their way. But Leon knew that they were already at a disadvantage. The terrorists had the upper hand now, and it was all because of Harris. Leon shot the officer a furious glare, his chest heaving with frustration. "You have no idea what you've just done," Leon said, his voice low and dangerous. Harris sneered, straightening himself and brushing off his uniform. "I'm doing my job," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "And you're just a thug pretending to be something you're not." Leon felt a surge of anger, his fists clenching at his sides. But before he could respond, Jack Monroe's SUV skidded to a halt nearby, the doors flying open as agents poured out, their guns drawn. Jack spotted Leon immediately, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Leon, what the hell happened?" Jack demanded as he approached, his gaze flicking between Leon and Harris. "This idiot," Leon spat, jerking his head toward Harris, "just compromised the entire operation. The targets are gone." Jack's expression darkened, his jaw clenching as he turned to Harris. "You just interfered in an active Interpol operation," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Do you have any idea how badly you've screwed up?" Harris opened his mouth to respond, but Jack cut him off. "Save it. We'll deal with you later." He turned back to Leon, his expression softening slightly. "We'll find them, Leon. We still have a chance." Leon nodded, though the frustration still simmered beneath the surface. He knew Jack was right. They couldn't give up now. The terrorists might have gotten away, but the mission wasn't over yet. They still had leads, and they still had a chance to salvage this. "All right," Leon said, taking a deep breath. "Let's move. We need to sweep the area and find any clues about where they might be headed. We can't let them slip away." Jack nodded, motioning for the other agents to spread out. Leon turned and headed deeper into the parking garage, his eyes scanning the shadows, his focus unbroken. He had come too far to let this slip through his fingers now. The mission was still alive, and he was going to see it through to the end, no matter what it took. Leon moved quickly and quietly through the parking structure, his eyes scanning every shadowed corner, every row of parked cars. He could hear the distant shouts of his fellow agents as they spread out, searching for any sign of the terrorists who had slipped through their fingers. The dim lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows that made the garage feel like a labyrinth, every vehicle and pillar a potential hiding spot. Despite the frustration still gnawing at him, Leon forced himself to focus. He had to push forward. The mission wasn't over yet. He moved deeper into the parking structure, careful to keep his gun drawn but low, not wanting to alarm any civilians who might be in the area. The muffled sound of sirens echoed through the concrete building, blending with the sharp click of his footsteps. He knew they were running out of time. Every moment they spent searching was another moment the terrorists could be getting further away, disappearing into the city. Leon's heart pounded as he strained his senses, listening for any noise that might give away their location. Suddenly, a noise caught his attention. A metallic clatter, the sound of something being knocked over. Leon turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he zeroed in on the source of the noise. It came from the far side of the garage near a cluster of maintenance vehicles. He moved in that direction, his steps cautious, his body tensed and ready. As he approached, he could see movement, a figure slipping between two cars trying to stay out of sight. Leon didn't hesitate. He broke into a run, his feet pounding against the concrete floor as he closed the distance between them. The figure glanced back, and Leon caught a glimpse of the man's face, one of the terrorists he had been tracking. The man's eyes widened, and he took off, sprinting toward an exit at the far end of the garage. Leon pushed himself harder, his muscles burning as he forced himself to move faster. He couldn't let this one get away. "Stop!" Leon shouted, his voice echoing through the garage. But the man didn't stop. He darted between the parked cars, weaving back and forth in an attempt to lose Leon. Leon followed, his focus unbroken, his training kicking in as he calculated every move, every turn. He could hear the man's ragged breathing ahead of him, the scuff of his shoes against the concrete. Leon was gaining on him inch by inch, closing the gap. Just as the man reached the exit door, Leon lunged, his hand catching the back of the man's jacket. He yanked him backward, sending him sprawling to the ground. The man let out a grunt of pain, his hands scrambling for something, anything to use as a weapon. But Leon was faster. He kicked the man's hand away, his gun trained on him as he spoke, his voice cold and commanding. "Don't move," Leon said, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The man froze, his eyes wide with fear as he stared up at Leon. Leon could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that he had nowhere left to run. "You're not going anywhere," Leon added, his tone leaving no room for argument. The man swallowed hard, his gaze darting around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. Leon could hear the footsteps of his fellow agents approaching, the sound growing louder as they closed in. Within moments, Jack Monroe and two other agents appeared, their guns drawn, their eyes locking onto the scene in front of them. Jack's expression was grim as he stepped forward, his gaze shifting from the terrorist on the ground to Leon. "Good work, Leon," Jack said, his voice low. He nodded to the other agents who moved in quickly, pulling the man to his feet and securing his hands behind his back. Leon stepped back, his eyes never leaving the terrorist's face. He could see the defeat there, the knowledge that it was over. Jack turned to Leon, his expression softening slightly. "We got word from the others. They managed to track down the rest of the group. They're in custody now." Leon let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, a sense of relief washing over him. They had done it. Despite everything that had gone wrong, despite the setbacks and the interference, they had managed to pull it off. The terrorists were in custody, and the mission was a success. But even as that relief settled in, Leon couldn't shake the lingering frustration, the bitterness of what had happened with Officer Harris. Jack seemed to sense his thoughts. He gave Leon a steady look, his voice quiet. "Harris is being dealt with. He'll face the consequences for what he did. You don't need to worry about that." Leon nodded, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. "He almost ruined everything," Leon said, his voice tight. "He put this entire operation at risk because he couldn't see past his own prejudices." "I know," Jack said, his tone calm, "and he'll answer for that. But right now, we need to focus on what we've accomplished. We brought them in, Leon. We stopped them. That's what matters." Leon took a deep breath, forcing himself to let go of the anger, at least for now. Jack was right. They had accomplished what they set out to do. The terrorists were in custody, and their network would be dismantled. It was a victory, even if it didn't feel like a complete one. Jack placed a hand on Leon's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of here. We've got a lot of paperwork ahead of us." Leon let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Paperwork? The real reward for a job well done?" Jack smiled, a hint of warmth in his eyes. "You know it." He turned, leading the way back toward the entrance to the garage, the other agents following with their prisoner in tow. Leon fell into step beside Jack, his thoughts still racing, but the tension in his chest beginning to ease. As they emerged from the parking structure, the cool night air hit Leon's face, and he took a deep breath, letting it fill his lungs. The flashing lights of police vehicles and Interpol SUVs lit up the area, agents and officers moving in organized chaos as they wrapped up the operation. Leon watched it all, a sense of pride slowly replacing the frustration. They had done it. They had stopped something terrible from happening, and that was worth everything they had gone through. But even as he stood there, watching the scene unfold, Leon knew that the fight wasn't over. There would always be another mission, another threat to face, and there would always be people like Harris. People who saw his skin color before they saw his badge, who questioned his place in spaces like this. That was a battle that Leon knew he would be fighting for the rest of his life. Jack turned to him, his expression serious. "You ready to head back?" Leon nodded, his gaze sweeping over the scene one last time before he turned away. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked toward the waiting SUV, Leon felt a sense of resolve settle over him. He had faced prejudice, he had faced danger, and he had come out on top. The mission was over, but his work wasn't. He would keep fighting, keep pushing forward, no matter what obstacles stood in his way, because that was who he was. That was what he did, and no one, not Officer Harris, not the terrorists, not anyone, was going to take that from him. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more exciting and intense narratives. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Check out our other videos for more gripping stories, and let us know in the comments what you thought. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.